Hello, good people of the internet. This is episode 126 of Knitting the Stash.
Knitting the Stash, boy.
And we have Spencer on today, which will be an extra treat as usual.
Unfortunately.
He's like so rude to himself. Okay, so today's cast, last cast we talked about knitting from photographs.
Last cast.
And I did complete my Twig Pattern Pullover successfully.
It is, I gotta say, it is a cool sweater.
You dig it.
Sometimes she knits a sweater, I'm like, nice sweater. And I'm kind of thinking, you know.
The truth comes out.
But this sweater, it just pops.
So we're going to talk about, kind of knits in translation and like how it might apply across different fields and stuff. And you like untranslatable things, so we might talk a little bit about things that are like untranslatable.
The unintelligible?
So, yeah, the unintelligible. That's what you always talk about. I love that. So we'll talk about that. And then I will show you the Twig Pattern Pullover and go through all the gory details.
Yeah, see this stuff.
Because for those of you who have been following along, you know that this was a sweater knit from a
Did
Japanese...
it get gory?
Well, there were moments when...
Up in this area.
The yoke got a little
She
funky.
freaked out a little bit.
Yeah. So this is a Japanese knitting pattern. Well, it was a Japanese knitting recipe, all in Japanese, no sizing, grading. So
very nice technical diagrams, though.
Tink is really having fun having big sighs behind us. She's clearly relaxing now. So we've got the Twig Pattern Pullover, and what else do I have today? Oh, I've got some fun Japanese knitting books that maybe we'll talk about with Spencer, maybe we'll talk about afterwards. I don't know how this is going to go. You always tell me I'm supposed to tell everybody where to find me. So where to find me? knittingthestash.com.
Where can you be found?
Where can I be found? On knittingthestash.com. That's where I live. I'm like one of those little people in the internet. That
and what do you do at knittingthestash.com?
I have classes. I have tutorials.
Do you sell yarn?
I do sell yarn.
You sell yarn?
I love selling yarn. Yarn is fun to sell. So if you need new yarn, but you're thinking about small batch producers, I've got all those people, wonderful people lined up over there, sheep lined up.
Do you have any used yarn?
No, I don't. Oh yeah, no, I do. I have a D-stash page. That's right. I have a D-stash page.
But it's not really used. Like you didn't unravel something.
Yeah, yarn is funny that way. It's like
you just don't do it secondhand so much.
It was owned. Well, people do with sweaters. They like unwind them from like thrift
and you
shops.
Steam out the kinks.
Yep, and then you reknit with it. It's pretty cool stuff.
That's good.
Yeah.
I can see that.
So knittingthestash.com. If you want to email me, knittingthestash@gmail.com, and I'm knitting the stash everywhere else. So like Ravelry. And Instagram.
Ravel me.
Yeah. And I do have an upcoming class that I keep forgetting to put I have a flyer, so I'll put that up here so you can see it. It's on June 11th.
Which one is it?
It is on Zoom. It is a creative sweater modification class, and it's about basically taking a stockinette sweater and looking for places on the sleeves and on the lower part of the body where you can add your own flair. So adding lace or cables or colorwork flair. Right?
June 11th.
June 11th on Zoom.
On the Zoom.
Live from 7 to 8:30.
How do people get the link?
You register on the website.
Oh, you go to Knitting the Stash.
And I will put that link down below. Yeah, so it's affiliated with the Central New York Fiber Festival. They asked me to teach, and because of pandemic considerations and whatnot, I'm doing the online version of the class. So it'll be in the evening. Tink is moving around. It'll be in the evening on June 11th, the first evening of the festival, I suppose. Yeah. So I hope you'll come join me, and there are plenty of spots left if anybody's interested in working on creative sweater modification with me. So yeah.
Well done.
Yay.
Can we talk about the photo?
Okay, we can start by talking about the photo.
Okay, the photo thing is so cool. So was the first thing you saw about this twig sweater was the photo?
Yeah, so this is the Twig Pattern Pullover by Yoko Hatta, and I saw the photo and I was just like, I love this sweater.
I love this.
I need texture in my life.
I'm gonna knit this from the photo, but then you end up with the pattern. You get some more details.
I did get the pattern, which helped a little bit.
But the photo helped a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so while she was knitting, she had this idea.
No, you had the idea.
I had the idea?
Yeah.
I had this idea.
And
to when she finished, if she finished, because it was a little dicey in there for a while, to recreate the photo. So side by side, the original photo. And are you going to show it here?
We're going to do it. Yeah, we'll put them up here
on the screen here. What do you think about it?
I'm pretty psyched with the way it turned out. I mean, I was kind of impressed that I had a pair of brown pants in my closet with which to kind of style the whole thing.
All right, good. That's good. And some glasses.
To put on.
But the sweater.
It came out really very, very similar.
Okay, for the meticulous knitters in the audience, those who notice details.
Yeah.
Are there any differences between the two sweaters?
It's kind of like what were those things you did as a kid where you'd have to go between the images and be like, what's different? What's changed? Do you ever do those?
Like a prison lineup?
Oh my gosh, no! Like
identify the suspect?
It was like a schoolroom or something, and you'd have like a squirrel over here, and then like the squirrel had glasses on over here. You know, like,
I don't think we went to the same kind of school.
Okay, anyway.
Okay, so are there any differences between the two sweaters?
The wrinkle. You thought the wrinkle was in the wrong direction. It's bugging you.
But the structure of the sweater, like, is it an identical copy? Is it a?
I mean, no. It's a simulacra. Like, it looks very much like the photo, but I didn't make it in the same way as the recipe recommended.
Okay, so it's got some differences. You didn't do it in pieces.
Didn't do it in pieces. Different rates of reduction.
Okay.
We'll talk about it when I get to the nitty gritty of the whole thing.
But the photo of the sweater
looks pretty good, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so this is a knitted translation, and I finally did find a couple of wonderful YouTubers who I'll put links to their things down below. Explained Japanese knitting patterns, and I'll talk about that.
So midway through, you're like hacking away at the sweater.
Just like, all right, I got this.
And some people came in, gave you some links.
Hey, by the way, it's all in the schematic. Here's how you read it.
Oh, and that helped out.
Yeah, it was great because that's what I needed for the reductions for the raglan.
There were some encoded numbers.
There's encoded numbers in these patterns, so yeah. And I was curious if it was just mine that was recipe, because I picked up a few other knitting books for Japanese knitting patterns. This one's Ecologue. You might recognize the sweater on the cover because it's a really
beautiful.
You love that sweater.
Yeah.
I really want to make that sweater.
One?
I really kind of want to.
Instead of birds, can we do like turtles or something though?
I could see that. So I was curious if other Japanese patterns were similar, and they are, except that they often offer.
Let's put it up.
They're less recipe-like and more. I don't know if we can show it because I don't want to.
Oh, we can't show.
Yeah.
We'll just talk about this right now.
They're less recipe-like. They offer at least 2 or 3 different sizes, some of them. But I think a lot of Japanese knitting patterns are more recipe-like.
These are beautiful.
But these offer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 different sizes from this book, at least. And then I picked up this other one. I wish I could tell you the title, but I can't. It's a beautiful...
It's called Badass Knitting.
It's really awesome. I love the sweaters in here. There's one, this is the one I want to make. Just because I think it's really
cool.
Beautiful. It's this color work. Yeah.
So you're gonna...
And this one offers some different sizing too, but all of the info is in the schematic. It's like, it's a different way of writing a pattern. So it's not this narrative where it's like, sizes 34 to 36, do this, then sizes, Yeah, exactly. It's like, you look at the schematic and it's all there. We'll talk about that.
That's cool.
And then the other Japanese knitting book.
Hold on a second.
I have to show this last one. This is a color work, like a Fair Isle book.
But with a Japanese kind
of... But with a Japanese kind of flair. So like I find the colors in this one and the color choices to be a little different than you might find in other Fair Isle books. So, but they go through different traditions like Nordic traditions and Argyle and all that other kind of wonderful stuff. And this is also by the same designer. So Yoko Hatta is pretty world famous designer in Japan. She's been in the industry since the 1970s. So yeah, she designed the pullover I'm working on.
So for all these knitting books you keep getting, do you have a long-term plan for storage around here?
I'm calling on the carpenter.
What are we gonna do with all these books?
Please build me some.
Actually, behind the camera, it's just solid books. All right, so.
And they're turned on their sides, and they're like
a
just
knitting
packed
library
in there because it's.
You might have to start a knitting library.
That would be.
Lend them out, and then they just don't come back.
No, that would be sad.
Let's keep them.
Anyway. Okay, so let's talk about translation then.
All right, translation. So this was a translation exercise.
Yes.
You had this schematic, you had a photo, you had a Japanese pattern.
Yeah. And Google Translate doesn't work as well with Japanese patterns as it does with something that's in Norwegian or something. It's just because it's a character language, you have to you can copy and paste, but you have to translate the PDFs into Word documents so that you can then capture it's just not quite the same.
We know a couple of translators, a couple of friends of ours, and they translate novels.
They speak like 9 languages each or something.
They're
and it's like,
language people.
Yeah.
And Eric and Tara.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, Eric and Tara. Anyway, Eric and Tara are these mad translators, and I think they would frown on the idea of using Google Translate. You know,
so.
it's just not.
I think, in fact, Eric offered to help me when I was doing the Norwegian sweater pattern. He offered to help me translate because I was over in Google Translate and I was just like struggling and.
But I feel like when sometimes I get comments on my YouTube videos in languages I don't know, and I don't really know any languages.
You speak Spanish.
English, So
Old Norse, perhaps.
So I'll do the Google Translate back and forth, but we're just kind of missing each other, and then people will drop comments on my page through Google Translate in English, and it's just
It's nice to be able to.
It's okay.
I mean, it's a good tool to be able to get a rough kind of go at things. I think, but then when you get down to the kind of nitty gritty,
like to knit a sweater.
Yeah, when you get into technical knowledge, I feel like there's so much language, like actual vocabulary that you need to learn.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the nice things about these knitting videos that I found for Japanese knitting is that they're like, this is the symbol for this, and you can kind of make it out, but it's like just having those basic little translation points are really, really helpful.
Some of that stuff.
But we've had a conversation about this knitting from photos or making these from photos before because you are not as into that kind of replication, duplication.
I've got some issues with copying other people's things. Not because of copyright, but just because I want to feel like I'm doing my own thing. So I'll go into Pinterest when I'm trying to build something. Like right now I'm trying to build this barn. And I'll go into Pinterest and get ideas or look over the web or whatever. And then
do your own thing.
Try to do my own thing. But right now, I'm a little bit guilty.
As it turns out.
Of copying.
Making from a photo.
Oh, I think I'm doing it. So can you put it on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to put it on the screen. The image that's all mechanical and specific and AutoCAD or whatever is not my image. That's the one I found on the interwebs. And it wasn't, I don't think the structure was actually built. I think someone just AutoCAD designed it. And I liked it, and I thought it was kind of cool. So I'm building something similar. It's not the same.
Is it with storage? Because he's working with shipping containers.
Yeah.
It is with
shipping containers. Yeah, it's really similar.
Interesting.
But I'm kind of riffing on it, and I'm not gonna in all my videos about the shipping container barn. I'm probably not gonna highlight that connection all that much.
But you might mention it, like in down below.
I don't think so. No.
But I think but I think that, and I want to teach a class about this too. Like I also think it's okay to do that as long as you're not selling making a profit on the thing yourself. I see photos of knitted sweaters, and we talked about this in the last episode on like TV or movies or something. And if you make one for yourself, that is a skill. That is awesome. You've created a replica of the thing.
Well, what if it's got some variation?
I think that's cool too. Yeah.
Because I feel like that idea of pure originality is kind of problematic. Everything is kind of based on something
Elizabeth
else.
Zimmerman would say that. She's like, it's all been...
Zimmerman?
She's kind of important in the knitting world.
Oh.
And she talks about unvention and the fact that pretty much anything that you've come up with has been somebody else has come up with it before you. So.
I was doing some research on shipping containers, like who invented the shipping container.
Oh, this was cool.
And some of the histories, like the little short histories, were like, this guy, McLean, invented the shipping container. But then when I started digging into it, the shipping container was based on something that was similar before, and there's always a kind of precursor to...
Yeah. Thus, Elizabeth Zimmerman. Just say it with me. Yeah, Liz Zimmerman.
So she's a author?
She's like big. She was one of the first kind of like... and biggest teachers for a lot of people in the knitting world because she was very much about like... Just figure it out. Like here are some ratios, here's some recipes, but like knitting shouldn't be a horrible, scary process. It should be something that you kind of learn how to do, like intuitively and like with
very cool.
With the idea that it's been done before and you're
continuing sort of a tradition.
Like she came up with the I chord thing that she calls it idiot chord. That's what the I.
That's why it's called an I chord. Oh really?
Idiot chord. Yeah.
Because anybody can do it?
It's
simple. It's almost like just a little crochet loop.
Yeah, it's just a crochet chain, basically.
I think that's what I do with my extension cords.
Yeah. We're getting off topic, but we're having fun. So, so I'm also curious because Spencer's, as much as he's not into like, I want to say not, I'm going to put it this way.
Knitting?
You're into originality. But you're also interested in this idea of like the untranslatable. And I felt that very much with this sweater pattern because like having worked on other sweater patterns in translation, like there's a whole book I've talked about called Knitting Languages. There are tons of sites online. There are people out there who can help you who are native speakers of multiple languages, who can help you with these patterns. But I felt like with this Japanese pattern, I kind of came up against a little bit of a brick wall in my mind of like, how am I going to do this? I kept going back to the photo because that's what I knew was like the most understandable, translatable thing.
Just look at the dang thing.
Yeah, and then I could look at the schematic and be like, well, in general, okay.
At some point, you just got to figure stuff out.
Yeah, but the untranslatable is kind of interesting. Like or you call it something different.
Unintelligible?
Unintelligible.
That's kind of the same thing. Unintelligible would be translatable to something else unintelligible.
Oh, yeah.
But
but who's it unintelligible to? I mean, I often feel like with these knitting patterns in other languages, and like when we would travel a lot in Europe over the last decade or something, like I always felt like, God, I'm the dumb American who's not speaking the language here. Like I should have put the effort into like, except we were traveling to multiple countries, so it would have been kind of impossible to learn like 8 languages, but...
Give it a few decades.
We went to Germany a lot, and I really at some point was like, we need to learn German.
We never did that.
So it's funny that language can be this unintelligible thing, even though it's completely intelligible if you bother to like learn it or something.
The thing I translate the most in my creative work, so to speak.
There goes Tink.
The thing I translate the most is I try to translate my projects into stories. And I find that to be really hard sometimes. Like if I'm building something or making something, I don't want to just make a video about how to make it. I want to kind of make the story of the experience. And I find like that translation, like when that works out, that's great. But sometimes it's hard to turn something into a story. Like I think you've done that with the sweater. Like you're not just talking about like how you knit the sweater. It's kind of like the whole story. And I think the story is really interesting. Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about stories, especially with your videos, I feel like, because that's one of the things you like to do. When you were doing the prison bus, it was like, you did the history of the prison bus and the, like people that you met along the way and like, how the...
I like that part of it.
Yeah.
But to make that translation is sometimes hard because you're just like welding something or whatever.
Right. And it's what do people actually want to hear? It's really, I'm always curious with the podcast, like, when we have these conversations, a lot of people will chime in the comments and say, oh my gosh, like I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk about that, or I think about these things in these ways.
Get that guy out of here. Like that kind of stuff.
I've never actually heard that one.
It'll happen right now. Get that guy out of here.
But I often think like, what do people actually, what are they interested in? Are they interested in the hearing, like for this sweater? Are they interested in like how I found it, what I did, what my process was, where I went to find other Japanese knitting books?
Like all that stuff.
Or is it just like, how did you modify it and how did you make it? Like what's
a little bit of all of it. There's probably someone out there who wants to make that sweater.
Yeah.
Make a third photograph.
That would be awesome.
Get the original, the copy, and the copy of the copy.
Oh man.
Isn't that sort of how Ravelry works?
Yeah.
Like all the multiplication of single patterns?
That's true. Yeah,
you just scroll through those sweaters, like everyone's made them in different colors.
Yeah, it's true. All the different iterations.
Although they've used patterns usually.
Oftentimes there are patterns.
Unravel me.
In native languages. Yeah, you can actually read them. So, yeah.
Thanks for having me on the cast.
It was nice to have you on the cast. Thanks for talking about Japanese knitting and translation.
Yeah. So are you going to go into detail about the sweater?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be now replaced by mannequin. With the sweater?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. So
as long as you're good with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. From now on, I'll be the mannequin.
So as promised, I'm going to walk you through the creation of this sweater. This is the Twig Pattern Pullover by Yoko Hatta. And Yoko Hatta, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, is a world famous designer for Japanese knitting, and she's published patterns with Brooklyn Tweed and Vogue Knitting, and I read somewhere that she has over 1,000 patterns on Ravelry, so absolutely check her out. From what I've seen of her designs, they really are kind of classic staple sweaters that you would wear, accessories. She runs the gamut with all kinds of different knitting projects, but I do really like her sense, especially with this sweater, this kind of understated but like really beautiful design work with the twisted stitches. So yeah, so Yoko Hatta, check her out. And she's actually the genius mind behind this book that I mentioned earlier, which is the pretty much a Fair Isle knitting book for Japanese styling. And so she goes through Fair Isle, she goes through Nordic, stripes, what else is in here? Argyles. And so, yeah, Yoko Hatta. And she, I believe, goes by the brand name of Kazukobo. And you'll see it up here, Kazukobo. I may not be pronouncing that correctly, but when you see that brand, that is Yoko Hatta as far as I can tell. And there are tons of other really great resources out there for Japanese knitting. Of course, in English, we are lucky enough to have a few of these stitch pattern dictionaries or stitch Bibles. So this one is the Japanese Knitting Stitch Bible, translated and written up by Gail Rome, and it takes you through a lot of the really wonderful cable work and lace work for Japanese knitting patterns. And I find that the style of this cable work and lace work and color work is a little bit different. It just has its own flavor to it, and I really think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful kind of variation on some of the other styles of lace work and cables and color work that I feel like I've seen working across a lot of different cultures and kind of knitting traditions. So highly recommend Japanese knitting if you're looking for something to kind of challenge yourself, see something new, see something slightly differently, see the world in a different way. And I've been really happy kind of going down these rabbit holes and learning from so many authors and designers, and it's just a wonderful experience. Now, one of the things I will say that saved me with this sweater was Kaylee of Chasing the Look. She commented on, let's see, maybe episode 124 or 125, mentioning a couple of different YouTubers who had put up videos about how to read Japanese knitting patterns. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Kaylee for reaching out and letting me know about these other knitters. So the best one that I found for helping me translate some of the schematic notes that I needed for the upper yoke here, that was Cletus Chan, and he has a video about how to read a Japanese knitting pattern, and he actually finally cracked the code for me on a couple of things that I was unsure of in the Japanese knitting pattern that I was working on. And also I want to give a shout out to Athena of Seedling Stitch. She's doing an entire series about how to read Japanese knitting patterns and Japanese knitting traditions, and I found her videos to be incredibly helpful. So if you're looking for information about Japanese knitting, there's tons out there. There are a few key points to remember, I'd say at the very beginning. One is that Japanese knitting needle sizes are different than UK sizes or US sizes, so make sure that you look that up and check out the knitting chart to make sure that when you're using the needle that's actually called for in the pattern is actually the right millimeter, because I found that out, and that makes all the difference. And then the schematics. Check out Cletus Chan's video about how to read the schematics, because it turns out with a lot of these Japanese knitting patterns, a lot of the information is in that schematic itself. So all of your rates of reduction, all of your stitch counts, your row counts, all of these things are just right there in the schematic, and it makes so much sense to me. And what I'm going to do here is drop in a quick image of what some of these schematics look like and some of the numbers, and I'm going to put it in for my sleeves that I used for this particular pattern, so that you can see how the rate of reduction is actually set out in the schematic, and you can see how to read that and how to interpret it. Once I get up to the yoke, I was reducing my sleeves every 5th row. I was reducing 2 stitches, and I did that 5 times. So that's why you have the 5, 2, 5. So I'm not going to try to decode Japanese knitting patterns on this particular podcast, and I will leave that to some of the experts out there in the world. But all of that preamble is to say this sweater is done. I'm really excited about the way it turned out. And the few modifications that I made, I'll tell you about the modifications first, and then I'll talk to you about how I managed to work the yoke, because that's where I left us on our cliffhanger of last time. So modifications: split hem, which I love to do, and I have a tutorial up about how I split my hems. I just think it's more comfortable for pullovers, and I'm so much more likely to knit pullovers right now because I'm making these split hem sweaters, and I like the way they feel. Because when you have a cardigan, you automatically kind of have a split hem because you have those 2 pieces coming together in the front. I just like a good split hem. So this has made all the difference, and it's made it so that I can really make a lot more pullovers and feel good about how they're going to fit and how I'm going to enjoy wearing them. Yay for split hems. So I split the hem. As I mentioned in the last episode, I worked this in the round, and I did not seam it, so there's no seam here, even though this is a half alpaca, half wool yarn. It's actually working out really well. I'm impressed with the memory of the yarn and the way that it hangs and drapes, so I'm not too worried about needing these extra seams or needing to add them in. But if I wanted to at this point, I could always add a kind of crochet chain up the side to give it a little more structure. For the armpits, I did put the stitches on waste yarn so that I could then Kitchener them together. And one of the things you have to remember is that if you're working in reverse stockinette, you have to do your Kitchener on the other side of the work, or do it in reverse, or, you know, to make sure that you're producing reverse stockinette or purl stitches on the right side of the work. So it's a little bit tricky. What else did I do? I decided to go for a turned collar at the top. So I'll pull it down here so I think you'll be able to see it. So this is turned and it's whip stitched down. I did that because although this yarn does have really great memory and it seems just fine, when you get up to a place like the collar where you're having a lot of potential for stretch and there's just less structure at the top of that collar, when I finished it just with a single pass, it just started to kind of hang open a little bit, and there wasn't some structural soundness to it, and I thought if I'm going to be pulling it on and off over my head multiple times, it needs to have a little more structure up there. So not only by turning it did I give it structure, because that provides, you know, there's a purl row up here at the top, and, you know, it's got extra fabric that's kind of holding it, but then the whip stitches around the inside of the collar also give it some structure. So this part of the sweater isn't going to stretch out of shape as quickly as it might. Tink is going to come up on the couch now. I don't know if you can see her on the camera. And Millie's joining us as well. So it's full-on puppy time up here. You gotta lay down, Millie. Yeah, hop up. There we go. Now we have 2 dogs on the couch. So some of the other modifications I made were to the sleeves themselves. I started out by working the number of stitches that I needed for, you know, my wrist to elbow and then up to my upper bicep. So I just went with my own rate of increase for the sleeves. They are knit bottom up, and that is because you do have this twig pattern running up the side of the sleeve, and I didn't want to try to figure out a way to, you know, cast on provisionally and knit that down and achieve the same result. I just don't think it would have been quite the same. So these were knit from the bottom up and joined at the armpit and the round for the raglan shaping. And like I said, because I knit these sleeves to my own measurement specifications, in the end I didn't have quite the same ratio of stitches that the recipe called for. In terms of the ratio of number of stitches of the sleeves and number of stitches at your front and back for your reductions, because your raglan reductions tend to be, you know, at some point they're every other row on both the sleeves and the body. And I wouldn't have had quite enough stitches for that rate of decrease because I was using a smaller circumference for my sleeve, so a smaller number of stitches. So I did need to modify the rate of reduction in the sleeve portion of the raglan, but only for the first couple of inches down here, right around the armpit and the bust, which I think makes a difference. Having the change of rate of reduction, or that different rate of reduction down here is less noticeable than if it were up high. The other thing that kind of allowed me to do that is because this sweater does have these beautiful kind of twisted lines running, this kind of faux, it makes it look like it's the raglan's shaping, but this is actually just a faux set of twisted stitches. So you're actually working your shaping on the plain portion here and then on the inner part here of the front and back of the work. So because the reductions are separated by those I think at least 8 or 10 stitches there, you don't get a kind of disjoint where one is reducing at a different rate than the other. You don't get any kind of clumping or puckering or anything like that because you have that kind of no man land where everything is kind of stabilized and the reductions are happening on either side of it. So I thought that was pretty cool. And otherwise, the tricky parts were, you know, deciding when to get rid of the patterning as I was doing my reductions. I think I did a pretty good job of trying to get rid of them in places where you'd maintain that pattern right up to the edge of the faux raglan shaping, but it's always a little bit tricky, and so you kind of have to pick and choose and decide for yourself like what you like. The main principle for me was trying to make sure that whatever I did on this side as I was going around the sweater, I tried to create something very similar on this side, same with the back, so that if I chose to get rid of you know, one of these stitches and turn it into a purl stitch, a background stitch, on one side, I wanted to try to make sure that I mirrored that on the other. Sometimes that meant that you know, I would be doing a reduction over here, but not completing the reduction over here, and I'd put a little marker and I would complete it the next round. So it's just a little, sometimes you have to fudge some things, make things work out. I'm very happy, for example, with the ways that these little twigs end up going right into the ribbing on the top of the sweater in the back. I think that turned out really well. I'm very, very happy with that. I feel a little less happy with the front of the sweater, and you can see, and I think you're only going to see it because I'm pointing it out, but this one runs directly into the center, into the ribbing, but these two don't, and it's a little disappointing to me because I really would have loved to have figured out a way to just, you know, maybe it's not totally possible. And like I said, I think you only notice it when I point it out. I only noticed it after the fact, but it's one of those things where like you see it goes so well in the back and you just want the front to be the same, but you know, it's all a little bit of a guesstimation, especially when you're working largely from a photo and a pattern in translation and you're just doing your best to try to figure out what the heck is going on with this sweater. I am personally pretty psyched about this project because to me, I was like, well, taking a walk with Spencer and I was like, I think there might be some knitting skill. I might have some knitting skill at this point. Just this sense of like, I can look at a photograph, I can look at a recipe, and I can figure out like how to create this sweater so that it has the back, you probably can't see it quite in there. It doesn't have any short row shaping, but the back neck is higher than the front neck because, you know, you decide where you're going to stop your front neck. Maybe it's down here, and then you are doing your shaping along the side, even for a crew neck. You know, for me, I think I stopped the actual knitting right about just maybe an inch below my collarbone. That way I knew that I could add, you know, 3/4 of an inch of collar, and it wouldn't be riding up on me, because that's what, you know, a lot of us hate with sweaters. You pull it on and then you're constantly like pulling it down because, you know, that front is riding up. A lot of us use short rows to kind of fix that in the back so that the back will rise up higher than the front. In this case, because it's a crew neck, basically you're pulling off stitches here, binding them off, and pick them back up to give it some structure and stability when I added the collar. So yeah, you're binding off a little bit lower, planning for the depth of the actual collar that you're going to add, and then you're doing your shaping along the sides so that the back can keep going and get taller, and the front can kind of gradually come up to the point where you need to have your crew neck, you know, meet on either side. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm very happy with the way that all turned out, given that I was mostly working from that schematic and the photograph. So I'm gonna give myself a little pat on the back for that one. I do really love this sweater. I put it on, I took some photographs, which I will insert here. It fits perfectly. It has a great sense of ease to it. Because it's alpaca, it's incredibly hot. So right now we're in like a 90-degree weather situation. So when I was trying this on, I was just thinking to myself, this is, alpaca is warm, and it is going to be a warm sweater. So yeah, so this is the Twig Pattern Pullover by Yoko Hatta, and I'm super psyched about it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about the modifications. If you're interested in knitting this sweater, I did put a lot of information over on my Ravelry page. I don't have a translation over there for you. You have to do that kind of work yourself. But with those videos that I mentioned and with the notes that I put up, I think you would be able to knit this sweater if you were interested in trying to take on a project like this. But as you know, I encourage all of you to challenge yourselves and try things that are new to you, and you know, try knits in translation and try different kinds of projects and patterns that you might not feel totally comfortable with, and see how it goes. You know, you can always rip things out and start again, and that process can be really useful. And I've learned a lot from my failures in knitting as much as from successes like this one. So yeah, go forth and knit, right? So thanks for hanging out in the yarn room today with me and with Spencer and the pups, who are now sleeping soundly on the couch. And I will see you in a couple of weeks for another episode. In the meantime, you can always send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com or leave a comment below. I do my best to get back to everybody who gets in touch with me. So yeah, take care, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.